first speaker today is Hayano Sensei. And Hayano Sensei is chair of the Department of Physics at Tokyo University. He's an award-winning physicist. He works primarily at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, flying back and forth. It seems like every other email I've had from him is at someplace in Europe. And Hayano was very rare and unique in that he became, in some ways, I think, what may prove to be a historical figure, because early on, in the first week or so after 311, he was among the very first to start providing meaningful information to the general public about radiation. And his followers went from, he'll talk about this in a minute, from just a few hundred followers to now over 150,000 people on Twitter. You know about the SPEEDY controversy. SPEEDY was a radiation disbursement modeling program that was designed to try to predict where a radiation plume would go. That information really never got out to the public or to the prefectural offices where it was needed. And Hayano actually was instrumental in this becoming known, because he went to Suzuki-kan in Next and was asking him about this, shocked to find that the person in charge of radiation assessment in Japan did not know about the model that they were presumably to be using for radiation assessment. And then through that kind of prompt and push, eventually the government did start responding to these issues. There was a period of time this last year where Hayano Sensei was paying for radiation testing of public lunches up in Tohoku, because when he went to prefectural offices and asked them to do it, they said it wasn't in the budget. And he was paying for this out of his own pocket. One of the benefits of having over 150,000 people on Twitter is soon, when the word got out, he was able to get some donations for that. But now, largely as a result of his efforts, in at least 7 prefectures, they're testing school lunches. And he's also been very much involved in the calibration of whole body radiation measurement up there in Fukushima, consulting with doctors, with nurses, with professional health authorities to try to help them to be able to explain these issues to the general public. Hayano Sensei is actually one of the world's leading physicists. This is a paper, for instance, that he will not present today. Let's see. Determination of the anti-proton to electron mass ratio by high-precision laser spectrometry. Oh. Collision effects of anti-proton Helenic hyperfine structure measurements. Fortunately, he will not be presenting on these topics today. But he will be talking about radiation. And then thereafter, each presenter will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have a long Q&A. So let's please welcome Ryu Hayano.
Thank you, Kyle. So before I start, let me make sure that everyone has this. If you haven't, there is still a spare copy in front. Please pick up one and fold up paper like this so that you can show to me whether it is T or F, okay? Right. So, as Kyle has already introduced, I work at CERN in Geneva. My main research subject is antimatter, and it is purely fundamental physics, no practical use, and has nothing to do with this. The Angels and Demons of Dan Brown novel. So this is what I was doing, and I still do this. I fly to Geneva every month. I teach in Tokyo when I have my group of physicists, postdocs, and students are living in Geneva area. On March 11 last year, I was in Tokyo, and right after the quake, everybody had to evacuate, and this is it was taken after about 5 minutes after the quake in front of the clock tower. And I went home and found that my TV wasn't functioning. It fell down from the cabinet and it was damaged. And soon afterwards, the TV station just started to stream the news programs over internet, so that I was able to capture some news. And on March 12th, I noticed that the news reporter said seizure. Okay, so this is my first Fukushima-related tweet that was, okay, it is too high. It's March 12th. Okay, so, and then what I started to do right after this was to visualize the data that TEPCO and NISO were sending out. There were just numbers. This is the first graph that I made based on the TEPCO table. That is the radiation level observed, measured around, yeah, that's what that says. In front of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. So that was, there was a sharp peak in the morning of March 12th. And this is another one which I made together with my ex-student. Although the radiation monitors, real-time monitors around Fukushima Daiichi were not functioning because there was no electricity, the real-time monitors around in Ibaraki, that's in between Tokyo and Fukushima Daiichi, were working and were sending out data. And this is what we made. And this is March 15th in the morning. It's 3 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock, and there you see there's the high radiation plume is moving southwards, and there's another one at around 7 o'clock. So this is what we've been tweeting around March early on. So as a result, the number of my Twitter followers increased from some 2,500 before the break to 150,000 and more. So my first question is this. Nearly 100% of radioactive cesium has already been released from the nuclear power plant, true or false? Okay, very good. Okay. So the current best estimate is the release from the nuclear power plant, or from the containment vessel is about 3%. Well, these numbers may change, but quite luckily the containment vessel still exists. It's leaking, but still exists, so that a majority, large fraction of the radioactive cesium is still in the and presumably strontium and plutonium still within the containment vessel. Okay, so the question number one, and number two, the radiation level in downtown Tokyo has returned to the pre-311 level, true or false? Okay, this is a slightly difficult question to answer, depending on how you see this data. Okay, this is the radiation level measured in Shinjuku. And as you can see, before the quake was here. Can you see it from back? And right now it has come down quite significantly, but it has not yet returned exactly to the pre-311 level. And you can see this more clearly if you look at the breakdown of the radiation level into the contribution of cesium-134 and cesium-137. And right now, this is in Chiba. Right now in Chiba, near, this is in Inage. It's 0.1 microsievert per hour. And 40% of this is due to cesium-134, which has a half-life of 2 years. And 20% of this is due to cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years. And 40% is due to natural background. So this shows that the radiation level will never go to the pre-311 level even after 10, 20 years. There will be some contribution from cesium-137, right? The Twitter is a bi-directional radio. It is quite unlike TVs or newspapers or radios. So in addition to what I tweet, what's important for me is what I hear. I mean, so I get feedback, and I also watch what people are talking on the Twitter. And what I noticed was that already last June, July, about a year ago, the MEXT has, and the DOE initially, and the MEXT has made this soil contamination map. And so, and various monitoring results have become available, but there was nothing known about food safety. The people were, and especially people were very much worried about what kids are eating. So, as Kyle already introduced, I proposed to measure school lunch. My proposal was to, well, already about a year ago, many school boards were already doing a sample test. So on Monday, they measured, for instance, meat. On Tuesday, tomato. And on Wednesday, potato, and so on. But people suspected that, if, you know, for instance, on Thursday, they served potato, but it was not measured on Thursday, so that they may have been contaminated. So what I proposed was to take everything on a school lunch tray and then mix in the blender and then measure using a highly sensitive germanium detector. And this I proposed, and I brought this to the Vice Minister of Vice Minister of Education. And after some struggle, then I succeeded to put that to have that in the JFY 12 budget of Minister of Education. And people were watching my interaction with the minister and Minister of Education, and many school boards were already started to measure school lunch already last October. The first to start was Yokosuka School Board. They started to do this on October 12th, October last year, and these are very small print. I'm sorry for that about that, but. The bottom line is they measured the school lunch at the level of with the detection limit better than 1 becquerel per kilogram, which is very good, and proved that this Yokosuka school lunch is completely recision-free. Okay, but I was not so convinced because Yokosuka lunch is okay, but Yokosuka is far away and the radiation level is quite low. So what about Fukushima? So last October, I sent this letter of this proposal to the mayor of Minamisoma City, Mr. Sakurai. And for about a month, I didn't hear anything. I didn't have any feedback. So I went to his office in Minamisoma and asked the mayor what happened to my proposal, and mayor said, which proposal? He didn't know about this. What we later found out was that the school board confiscated this letter, and this didn't reach the mayor. So I proposed him again to have it measured, and then it started. My next question is, the Fukushima milk is safe to drink, true or false? The answer is true. No cesium has ever been detected in Fukushima milk. And this is the, eventually the school board invited me to one of their schools in Minamisoma, and I had the pleasure of having lunch with 6-year-old. And so this is local milk that they serve and the vegetables mostly come from outside of Fukushima, but milk is local. And they have been measuring since January, and no cesium at the level of better than 1 becquerel per kilogram has been detected. So that the Fukushima, at least in Minamisoma City, the Fukushima lunch is cesium-free. And I started to help medical doctors in Fukushima to operate the whole body counters. Well, medical doctors have never had have never been trained to measure radioactivity in person's body, and so they didn't have any idea how to use such a device. So that's why I've been helping the medical doctors since last year, and this was taken. This picture was taken in Minamisoma Municipal Hospital, and this the structure behind these medical doctors, that's the whole body counter made by Canberra company, and that's one of the 3 devices that they have in this hospital. My next question is this food screening. We measure the radioactivity of food, and then the whole body counter that we measure the internal contamination of people. Are they both on the same principle, true or false? The answer is true. Okay. So the food screening, we measure gamma rays emitted by cesium within meat, for instance. So we put the detector and measure the gamma ray, and then estimate the contamination of meat or vegetables and so on. And then for people, it's the same thing. If you are contaminated, if you ingested or inhaled cesium, then that cesium nucleus emits gamma ray, and that's what you detect. So they are based on exactly the same principle. But it is difficult to operate and sometimes give very, very strange answer. So this is one of the examples that I encountered in Fukushima. This is operated by an NPO in Fukushima City, and they were about to release a press release saying that everybody in Fukushima City has about 20 becquerels per kilogram of weight of cesium. So this is 20 here, and this is age. So these are children, and concerned parents brought their children and have them measured, and together with children they also measure themselves. So that produces this double hump structure in age distribution. And the center is at 20 becquerels per kilogram. And I was not so convinced about this with this result, and I asked them to give me the data, and I analyzed and found out that that there is a finite offset. The offset, there was an offset so that this 20 actually should have been 0. It is like when you try to measure your weight and you step on the scale, you first have to adjust the dial so that the 0 is 0, but this whole body counter has been operated without doing such an adjustment. So to do the adjustment, we use a phantom, this figure like this. So this came from Belarus, and then we measured this plastic phantom, and this device reported this plastic figure is contaminated with 400 becquerels of cesium. Of course, this is nonsense. So we have to adjust this device so that it reports 0 when there is no contamination. So this is the kind of things that we have been doing. Let me show you some recent whole body counter results. I measured at Minamisoma Hospital, which is just 20 kilometers north of Fukushima Daiichi. And this compares the Minamisoma result in red. This is a cesium becquerel per kilogram, and this is the Minamisoma result. And this gray is the Chernobyl result that was the result measurement in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, measured after 5 to 10 years after of the accident. So you can see that the Fukushima people are not so much contaminated as compared to people around Chernobyl power plant. But this does not mean that Fukushima is not contaminated at all. The Fukushima soil is very much contaminated, so that if you catch a wild boar, for instance, then Fukushima wild boar, you can find 6,000 becquerels per kilogram, even up to close to 15,000 becquerels per kilogram in wild boar. So that if you allow these people to go into mountains and have them eat, allow them to eat, to pick wild mushrooms and bamboo shoots and so on, they will certainly become contaminated. So this already shows that the food screening and the food distribution in Fukushima has been working quite okay. Then my next question is, once you ingested cesium-137, it continues to damage your body, damage your DNA for some 30 years. The half-life of cesium-133 is 30 years. Is this statement true or false? This is not true. It is a biological half-life. So even if you eat or ingest or inhale cesium-133, with a half-life of about 100 days, cesium gets out of your body, mostly through urine. And it's shorter for kids. So, so suppose I find somebody who has 2,000 becquerels of cesium in body. This person may have inhaled a huge amount of cesium in March last year, and that amount of cesium has been decreasing with the half-life of 100 days. Or this person may be eating constantly contaminated food and has accumulated this 2,000 becquerels of cesium in body. If you measure this person just once, we cannot tell the difference. So what we are doing now is we measure, when we find somebody above, say, 1,000 becquerels, we measure the same person twice. And this is a result. So this was measured in Minamisoma City. So this is these are the persons above 1,000 becquerels per body. And this is days, so this is about 4 months. And in all days, in all cases, except for these two, the cesium level, amount of cesium in body has decreased, meaning that they're not eating contaminated food. And we can calculate how much cesium they are eating, and the result is they must be eating about 15 to 20 becquerels per day. That is and this is only 2 people out of 10,000 we measured. And the same can be learned from the measurement done at Hirata village, which is about 30 kilometers southwest of Fukushima Daiichi. And this is, again, the first measurement and second measurement from October till May. And we didn't find anybody whose cesium level increased in the second measurement. This person is very flat and must be eating about 10 becquerel per day, but not more. And all other cases, the cesium level decreased. And so these whole body counter results are quite consistent with what the co-op Fukushima recently did. They asked 100 families to cook an extra serving of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they measured the cesium level of okay, I have to skip this, so I show this to you. So this is a measurement, and this green is the level of radioactive potassium-40 that you overeat every day. Okay, this is a natural radioactive isotope. And we receive about 200 microsievert per year due from eating radioactive cesium, radioactive potassium-40. And out of 100 families, cesium was found in 10 families. Now let me show you the distribution, which is this. So 90 families where cesium was below detection limit, and in 10 families, the maximum was about 12 becquerels per kilogram, which corresponds to, if this family ate the same food for 1 year, then the dose, accumulated dose, effective committed dose would have been about 0.14 millisieverts per year, which is quite low. So the current Japanese food regulation limit is 100 becquerel per kilogram. Is this true or false? You know this? Yeah, this is true. And this is quite strict. The EU limit is 1250 becquerel per kilogram, and US limit is 1200. And as compared to this, the Japanese limit is quite strict. And since April 1st this year, when this 100 becquerel per kilogram regulation went into effect, some 53,000 food samples have been tested for cesium. And my question is what is the fraction of the food examined which exceeded this limit? Was it about 10%? What do you think?
How much food are they checking?
Huh?
How much food are they checking? We don't have any idea.
This is how much or how many?
When and how often?
Okay, so they measure every day, and the accumulated number of samples was 53,000 since April 1st. So over 3 months. Okay. So they publish this every day on the website. And the answer is about 2%. So this is a distribution. This is the becquerel per kilogram, and this part is beyond about 100 becquerels per kilogram. And this is about 1,000 out of 53,000. This is about 2%. And so this is the final question. The internal contamination in Fukushima, that's the Fukushima citizens, is the worst in Japanese history now. Okay, you know this well. So this is false. So the worst was in 1964 as a result of H-bomb and H-bomb test. This is fallout. So everybody in Japan and maybe in all other countries in Northern Hemisphere must be eating about 4 becquerels of cesium per day, I'm sorry. And as a result, everybody had about 500 becquerels of cesium in body. This is the whole body counter result back in 1964. So the Fukushima contamination is less, average contamination is much less than this. So the question is internal exposure, and compare the internal exposure and external exposure risk in Fukushima, which is higher? Is the internal exposure risk higher in Fukushima? True or false? But do other people think? You're not answering. The answer is false. So this is a result of the personal dosimeter worn by pregnant people and pregnant women and also school kids in Fukushima and other cities. And majority is already below 1 millisievert per year. And there's a small fraction in many cities. There's less than 50% is above 1 millisievert. But as I have shown you, the internal exposure is much, much less than 1 millisievert per year. So if you compare the relative risk of external and internal exposure, external exposure is higher in Fukushima now. So this is my concluding slide. So the quake and the tsunami have devastated northeastern part of Japan and killed many people. And the Fukushima Daiichi reactors were damaged very badly, releasing radioactive xenon, iodine, and cesium. But luckily, various results, which have recently become available, consistently show that the internal contamination level of Fukushima citizens is quite low. And food screening has been obviously quite effective, but we need to continue food screening and also double whole body counter measurement for many years to come, because otherwise people may start to eat contaminated food in mountains. So thank you very much.
Next up is Nicolas Sternsdorff. Nicolas is a graduate student at Harvard University and a visiting researcher, doctoral student over at Sophia University as well. He's been doing research on citizens, groups that are doing radiation assessment. More generally, he's been up in Tohoku looking at how various parties, various organizations, and citizen activists are assessing this situation. So let's welcome Nicolas.
And thank you for coming. I will not be using the PowerPoint, so maybe we can turn on the lights over here, so I feel like I'm speaking in the dark. So to start, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm training to be an anthropologist right now. So my main concern when looking at questions of food safety after Fukushima is not so much from a scientific point of view, but to think of these things as culture, as a movement of ideas, and how people who, I think many of us, myself included, up until 3/11 were not terribly engaged with the details of radiation science. So how people incorporate this knowledge into their everyday lives and how it changes the way you go about choosing foods for cooking on a daily basis. So the paper I'm going to present today, I want to suggest to you a way of understanding food safety since 3/11 and how propose a framework to think about some of the anxieties that have come about with Japanese consumers and also foreign people in Tokyo. So on January 24th, 2012, the Japanese Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, in conjunction with the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, held an open meeting in Fukushima City to discuss the changes that would come soon into law regarding the permissible level of radioactive pollutants in the food supply. So a little bit after the earthquake, the Japanese government set up a provisional level, an emergency level of up to 500 becquerels per kilo, and this was going to be revised to 100 becquerels per kilo, and this became revised eventually in April of this year. And the point of the meeting was to inform the people and to receive comments on these changes. So the meeting consisted of basically a series of lectures by government officials explaining how the science of radiation works and how they were going to go about implementing these new measures. Once the meeting was over, or once the speeches were over and there was time for questions and answers, there were several farmers in the audience and they stood up and asked really hard questions from the government representatives. One of them got up and said, "We're doing our best as farmers to provide safe food for the Japanese population." And in fact, he said, 99.9% of our crops are testing under the safety level. So if we are doing our best and if we are growing safe food, then why are consumers not buying it? And then he chided the government saying, "We are doing our part, what the hell are you doing?" He sat down, there was a round of applause for him from other members in the audience. A second farmer went up and said, look, I'm just not sure whether people are going to buy this new safety level of 100 becquerels per kilo. You as a government initially said that the radiation levels in Itate, which is a town in Fukushima, were safe, only to go back on your statement a month later and had to ask everyone to please leave. So if you couldn't get this right, then how can you expect anyone to believe that this new level that you're setting up now is correct? Again, applause, he sits down. And finally, a third farmer gets up, and he chided the government for focusing exclusively on questions of safety. So he said, the problem with what you're doing here is that you're focusing exclusively on the technical measures of safety, shoku no anzen in Japanese. But you haven't addressed at all how you're going to go about reassuring people on a more emotional and subjective level about the safety of food supplies. So he said the government could set levels as strict as they wanted, but if they couldn't address also how people felt about these levels, it didn't matter. So the real way forward for him was to bring these two aspects together, which in Japanese is anzen to anshin or tsunagaru. And I want to suggest to you today that this difference between the concepts of anzen and anshin in Japanese provides a really useful framework of a framework for thinking about what's been happening in Japan since 311. Anzen and anshin are often used together. Shoku no anzen, which is safety, refers primarily to the world of science and rationality. When you say shoku no anzen, it means to measurable ways of consistent measurements and established parameters of where you draw the line between something being safe and unsafe. It is basically a moment of science and a moment of established parameters. Whereas anshin, on the other hand, a lot of my informants have used the same phrasing, which is kokoro no mondai, which is a problem of the heart. That anshin refers to subjective ways in which people relate to food. There's an affective and emotional relationship. And what I find interesting is that in Japanese, often these two concepts are used together. That you'll often hear foods being described as anshin anzen na shokuhin, which is like a safe and reliable food, or food that is safe and that you can eat with confidence. And anshin, if you translate it by itself, often gets translated as peace of mind. What I find very interesting about this is when you say food safety in English, it points primarily to the world of science and measurements. But this formulation in Japanese of bringing anzen and anshin together in one go allows us to think not only about the scientific ways in which people think about their food, but also the emotional and more subjective reactions they have to it. And what I want to suggest to you today is that a good understanding of food safety will emerge in the interplay between these two concepts. Okay.
Sorry.
So I'm going to spend the rest of my time here today telling you a few stories of where I've seen this problem come up, and to suggest to you that one of the problems that I think has arisen in Japan since 311 is that the meaning of safety itself and how you define it is in flux. So let me get back to my paper here. So one of the things that I do a lot for my research is I go to a lot of study sessions. So in April of this year, I went to a study session with one of the groups of concerned mothers about radiation. And the speaker of the day was a food activist and author who basically told us not to believe anything the government is saying. That she said they think that they're telling you that there are safe levels under which you can consume radiation. And she said that this is simply not true. The only real safe place is zero. And she then chided the government. I'm going to stand a little bit over here. She then chided the government for distributing what you might have seen floating around, for those of you who were around last year, the inverted pyramid. So this inverted pyramid showed different levels of exposure regarding different activities. So the top of the inverted pyramid was how much radiation you take by taking a trip to Brazil. So as you go up on a plane, you get more radiation. A little bit below that was a thing on how much radiation you're exposed to if you get a chest X-ray. and a number of other activities. And she suggested, actually in contrast to what you said before, that this way of equating different activities regarding and equating different activities and the radiation level is just simply misguided because it conflates internal and external exposure, which is, you said, was not true a moment ago. She then proceeded to tell us all that we should be very careful about this distinction, and that in fact internal exposure was something to be very worried about. And we spent the rest of the evening reviewing how to purchase safe foods and the various cooking techniques that you can employ to draw out cesium from your food and not ingest it. So what I was interested in is that she formulated a version of food safety in this talk where the only acceptable place was 0. And to her this was the only thing, and she repeated often, over and over again, that we should not trust the government levels, that the only place we needed to go was 0. A couple of days after that, I attended another session at a food co-op in Kanagawa that focuses on delivering safe food to their members. And one of the members of their safety team came to explain to us the policies that the food co-op had been instituted to assure that there was no radiation in the food they distributed. And he started the presentation saying, well, our view is that nothing good can come from putting radiation in your body. Simple as that. So our duty as a co-op is to make sure that you don't do that. Even though there might be levels under which the risk is very minimal, that doesn't mean that there is no risk. And we can't see why you should be taking on that risk. Incidentally, this had happened, this study session happened just one day after the Ministry of Agriculture issued a statement asking retailers to please stop enforcing stricter standards than their own. So the idea of the Ministry of Agriculture was that there were all sorts of retailers in Japan now promising levels stricter than the government, and if they kept on doing that, and they thought people were just going to get confused. And in fact, you might see there are things like national chains like Eon. If you go to their shops, you will see these very big advertisements for zero radiation. So I've met places, there are places as big as Eon, to other people I've met who run one-person operation vegetable shops that sell exclusively vegetables grown in Western Japan. So I asked a person from this co-op about this and about this statement, and he said that for him this was how he felt about the government levels, and the government basically telling him to stop promising stricter levels. And for him, he said this was not a question of science anymore. He said even if I agree with the science of what the government might be saying, and even if I agreed that 100 becquerels is a good place, as an institution that is, our purpose is to deliver safe food to our members, we simply cannot use the levels that the government has set up, because there's just so much mistrust of what the government is doing that we will have zero credibility if we use their standards. In other words, to take on their standards was to take on the mistrust of the government, and in order to avoid that, they just simply had to go promise stricter levels. That was the only way in which they could gain some legitimacy. Just a little bit after that, I met with a government representative who has good access to some of the deliberations regarding food safety, and I ran some of these ideas by her. And her take on this whole thing was that she felt perfectly comfortable with the science. She thought there was nothing to be worried about where the levels are. She thought they were in fact quite strict. And her thinking was that we're more at risk from dirty chopping boards and other cooking practices we might all employ in our houses than from the radiation that may or may not be in our food. But there are so many other risks in our food supply that we've internalized that those are probably more dangerous at the moment. But what she said was that, and this I thought was quite interesting, that one of the places where there was a real failure on the part of the communications effort of the government was to articulate a clear rationale for why people should expose themselves to radiation in the food supply. So why should we eat this? And in her mind, this was a real problem. There was no clear reason for why people should be taking on this risk. And we talked about the inverted pyramid I described a little bit earlier. And her thinking was, well, of course you take on these risks, But when you go on a trip to Brazil, or if you're a plant worker at a nuclear plant, or if you're an airplane pilot or a flight attendant, you're cognizant of these risks and you're compensated for them. However, there is, in her mind, there is no real benefit from eating some contaminated foods. And this came up a little bit after when I attended this session with a member of the Diet who's been campaigning to promote strict standards, and he said, well, nobody's saying let's support the farmers in Chernobyl. Like, nobody says like Chernobyl tabete wonshi, you just don't hear that. So to him it was just a little bit strange. Why are we trying to support the farmers in Tohoku and this whole campaign of Tohoku tabete oin shio? Well, like, what is the point of that? And it comes back to this question of what's the rationale for exposing ourselves to risk? So, to wrap my presentation up, I want to come back to the idea of what can anthropology bring to the study of this moment in Japan. A week after the meltdown at Fukushima happened, an anthropologist by the name of Barbara Rose wrote an article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which is an academic journal in atomic sciences. And in that column, she asked, what is safe? And she's an anthropologist who's been working for a long time thinking about what she calls this idea of long-term low-level exposure that is safe. And she said that we really, as a social scientist, need to start getting an idea of what the meaning of safe is. And what I've been trying to tell you today is to think about where does the concept of safety itself emerges. And my argument to you, and what I want to leave you today with, is that this idea of safety will not emerge from technical standards alone. It will not emerge only in the world of Anzen, but it is in the interplay between how people relate in a subjective and emotional way to their food supplies and these technical standards. It is in that space in between, in the way in which the two come together, that a new form of understanding food safety can emerge. And that since 3/11, there's been a real challenge of bringing these two things together again. And there's been numerous groups that have tried to come up, and some of the groups I've described to you earlier, numerous groups have come up with new and different ways of defining the relationship between the two, and new versions of safety that can be either below 100, below 0, below whatever you wish. Thank you very much. I didn't end up using them a lot. Yeah.
Our next presenter is Satsuki Takahashi. She's currently at Princeton University as a research fellow, was at Tokyo University prior to that, and has a Ph.D. from Rutgers in Anthropology. From fall of 2013, she'll be professor of Anthropology, Sociology at George Mason University. She's been doing research up in Tohoku and in Japan in fisheries, and now dealing with issues related to radiation. Let's welcome Satsuki.
Trying to adjust my chair. here. Sorry about it. It's a little clumpy today, so I'm going to sit down and talk. As Kyle introduced me, I've been studying about the fisheries aquatic for a long time. I graduated from Tokyo University for fisheries, so I've been kind of more than 10 years being a fish geek. And I studied about the fisheries resource management as environmental anthropology / cultural anthropologist as a Ph.D. student in one of the town in Ibaraki. And also I've been studying also some fishing communities in Fukushima and some other parts. And especially after March 11, I've been traveling, before I got pregnant of course, but I've been traveling through the coastal line of Tohoku as well as the northern Kanto to study the effects of the March 11, including tsunami, earthquake, but also the radiation contamination, as well as a rumor about the radiation that affects the fishing industries. And today's talk, I'm going to talk about some of the issues being already discussed by two of the presenters earlier, but it's not exactly the same thing. I'm trying to focus on the theorizing some of the scientific discussion as well as some cultural discussion that comes up from these issues of the food safety. One of them is a visual representation of a risk, visual representation of scientific discussion of a risk, and how the cultural interpretation of those risks have been available for people, and how those image of the risk has been negotiated by not just the consumer but also government and media and so forth. So my talk is primarily focused on the cultural construction of the notion of a risk as well as safety. And I'm going to read this paper that I recently wrote. This was one of my favorite pictures that you showed. But throughout the post-Fukushima Japan, as well as outside of Japan, as we see from the picture, people wonder what they can eat, where they can go, and also how to know if they're safe. And now we're living in what Ulrike Beck has famously described as a risk society. Ulrike Beck is a sociologist in Germany who published a quite famous book called Risk Society in 1986, just a few months after the publication by itself came right after the Chernobyl accident. And many people within and outside of Japan, in fact, describe post-Fukushima Japan as a risk society, and Beck himself calls that too. According to Beck, risk society refers largely to reflective, late modern societies and their approaches to dealing with new kinds of risk like radiation. These new kinds of risk are produced by earlier industrial modernization, such as development of the nuclear electric industry, energy industry. But the consequences of the new kind of risk are limited by neither space nor time. The tsunami on March 11 kills thousands of the people in northeastern Japan, but the devastation was very immediate and very local. Radiation risks, however, have spread beyond Fukushima and beyond Japan. Many of us know how the radiation level went up in the coast of west coast of America. Although it is still unknown with regard to Japan, we have learned from the aftermath of 1986 Chernobyl nuclear accident that the consequences of radiation-related environmental pollution as well as the health effects last for generations. New kinds of risk also contain high uncertainty. These risks are uncertain because of the invisibility of nuclear substances, as well as the concealing of information by government as well as the producers, and also by contestation over and surrounding scientific evidences. Due to these uncertainties, it is impossible to find a full picture of radiation risk. Since the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant station started its operation in 1971, the risk of radiation was sealed within the wall of the plants, supposedly physically, but at least conceptually. And I say this at least conceptually because some of the news stories or debate after March 11th came out to discuss the radiation has been released, at least a small dosage, because of some minor accidents happened in the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And whether it's true or not, those debate only came after the March 11th, largely in the public after the March 11th. So at least I say at least conceptually, the risks used to be hidden. But the live footage of the explosion and the crippled nuclear power plant were too visible to allow people to ignore the risks, even as they themselves remained in many ways invisible. Using a number of visual tools, a number of experts, including nuclear physicists, marine scientists, and so forth, across Japan as well as the foreign media, have vividly explained to viewers about the various traces and shapes of the spread of radiation risks in the soil, the air, clouds, and the ocean. There are different scientific theories on the spread of radiation. There are various simulations of radiation traces, but there is no uniformity in shapes. Vividly alerted but uncertainly informed, however, people in post-Fukushima Japan are grappling toward the understanding of risk and safety. For decades, Japanese government disaster management plans have been built on the expectation that radiation would be simply dispersed and diluted once released into the ocean. Of course, this has turned out to have been wrong, but because of this expectation, the government had never considered setting any radiation safety standard for fish until almost a month after the March 11 disaster. South of Fukushima on April 4th, high level of radiation was detected in Konago, or in English Sandlands, called off the coastal line of Ibaraki Prefecture. Immediately, Konago fishing in Ibaraki was cancelled. The next day, government created a tentative radiation safety standard for fish. According to the standard, the limit for the radioactive iodine is 2,000 becquerel per kilogram, and that for radioactive cesium-134 combined with the 137 is 500 becquerel per kilogram. As long as it meets this standard, fish is officially considered to be sold and be eaten. By establishing the regulation, the government hoped that this standard would provide consumers a sense of safety. Many consumers, however, classify any fish coming from Fukushima or Ibaraki prefectures as risky. Based on Japanese food labeling regulations, landing locations are clearly displayed on the fish packages. Therefore, consumers have the choice to avoid buying any fish coming from Fukushima or Ibaraki prefecture and to choose fish from other prefectures far away from the disaster zone. As a result, even when fish species that are determined to be safe according to the government standards, those from Fukushima and Ibaraki are either unsold or given much lower prices than those they could have fetched prior to the disaster. The center of this heated discussion on food safety is what is called Fuhyo Higai, or damage by rumor. Seki Naoya, a sociologist in Tokyo who has written a number of publications on Fuhyo Higai, defines the damage by rumor as economic damage caused by anxiety about risk through media coverage, resulting in consumers' restrained purchasing of the actual safe commodity. And I put the stress on the safe food, the safe commodities, because what is actually constitutes a safe is highly ambiguous. There are many experts who argue about what constitutes safe or risky, but their claims are almost always contested. This discussion of a rumor, in fact, illuminates the Ryugo's theory about uncertainty surrounding the new risk. The government tells consumers that we must conquer damage by rumor, by making rational decisions based on the scientific information on safety. For the government, the radiation safety standard is based on its own scientific evidence. Officials also argue that conquering the damage by rumor is important for supporting disaster victims in Fukushima and Ibaraki. Since March 11, there have been a lot of reconstruction events under slogan Buy, Eat, and Support. One sunny weekend, a couple of months after the March 11 disaster, I participated in a reconstruction event held at Tsukiji Fish Market in Tokyo. Among a number of booths held by farmers, fishers, and the fish wholesalers from the different municipalities of the disaster zones, I spent the whole day with the fishermen from Ibaraki Prefecture. Our mission of the day was to hand out a free sample of fish from Ibaraki in order to appeal to the customers about the safety of their fish. We repeated the invitation to those visitors. We said, please try our fresh and delicious fish from Ibaraki. In fact, it's delicious. But that doesn't mean there is no contamination of the radiation. Many people, including elders, young parents with children, and even some pregnant women, stopped by at our booth and tried our young anchovies on the small sample tray. And even some of them took a moment to express their sympathies to those fishermen from the disaster zone. According to the prefecture's website, the result of the radiation test on anchovy juveniles came out a few days earlier was 3 becquerel per kilogram, which is much lower than the government's safety standard. So it's considered as safe. And another result that came out a few days later, after the reconstruction event, was 67 becquerel per kilogram. So it went up a lot, but still was under the 500 becquerel per kilogram, which was the standard at that time. Both the results were safe by the government standard. Based on the narrative of conquering the damage by rumor, those people who voluntarily consume fish and crops from the disaster zone, like those visitors that I met at the particular construction event, are considered as good citizens. Adriana Patrina, who conducted anthropological research on the health issues in post-Chernobyl Ukraine, has described the construction of a community of people around a nuclear-related diagnosis as biological citizenship. In post-Soviet Ukraine, without the socialist welfare system, many people claimed that any symptom they experienced to have been caused by radiation, so that the medical treatment for their illnesses would be economically covered by the government. They were often criticized for cheating the healthcare system set up to respond to the nuclear crisis. It is, however, almost impossible to prove whether any illnesses is or is not caused by exposure to radiation. This concept of biological citizenship is instructive for analyzing these discourses of conquering the damage by rumor and the post-Fukushima citizenship in Japan. In Japan, at this point, it is still only 16 months after the disaster. There have not been reports indicating clearly an increased number of cancer patients. In the immediate post-disaster period, one might see Japan's biological citizenship as being produced partly through people's active participation in taking small doses of radiation into their bodies in order to support the victims by buying and eating veggies and fish from a disaster zone. Such a collective practice might also be seen as if people are sharing the sin of the nation. That said, there are many other people, consumers, who keep away from products from these regions. Some of them say that they feel guilty for participating in damage by rumor, but some others express anger for being labeled as bad citizens. For them, why should supporting the victims mean purchasing risky food for themselves or for their families? Post-Fukushima citizenship is indeed contested. For the meantime, fishing families are trying to survive by catching stigmatized fish from stigmatized sea. But the challenges ahead of them are even greater than a few months ago. The Japanese government revised the radiation safety standard as of April 1st this year in order to make it stricter. The new standard for radiation cesium is 100 becquerel per kilogram instead of 500, as many of you got that right from the question that Professor Hayano raised. And due to this adjustment, more fish species have been taken out of the list of safe commodities. A few days after the date of the new regulation enactment, a fisherman from Ibaraki Prefecture wrote to me via email, quote, "I got a good catch this morning, but I had no fish to sell. With the new rule, I had to throw out most of the fish back into the water," end quote. He also wrote that the local government told him that the radiation substances would be discharged from fish bodies over the next couple of years. But he added that he is not that optimistic. Risk is hidden under the water and in the body of a fish. Nobody knows what the radiation risk will look like tomorrow or a year after from now. The limited clues available include the radiation numbers resulting from a monitoring test. Those numbers, when connected to the official standards, signify a level of safety. It falls to individuals, however, to interpret the numbers and to determine whether they will follow the standards. By campaigning against damage by rumor, the government attempts to promote the consumer's confidence in food safety. If many people follow the government's food safety standard, there is safety in numbers. That is one way what we might define safety in post-Fukushima Japan. Thank you very much.
I will take questions. If you could please use the mic.
My name is David Wagner. I run a Facebook page called Japan Food Safety. Oh, feedback. Are we okay? I have a question. I have a lot of questions, but I'll just limit it to one for now. At present, from my understanding, there are no legal penalties for the sale of food that exceeds these targets. So that basically you can sell the food and there's no penalty for exceeding it. Do you think there should be legal ramifications for people who do not abide by the targets?
I guess that was for
Dr. Hayano?
Okay. We have a microphone here?
Yeah, it's the cord up on the podium.
Yeah, it's true that there is no penalty, and it is in practice it is very difficult, because if you for instance measure the same food twice, then the numbers would be different. You know this because of the statistical fluctuation of the radioactive decays, so that even if the food was say measured to contain 101 becquerel per kilogram, which is above the limit. If you measure this again, there could be 90 because of the statistical fluctuation. So if you apply a very strict rule of penalizing everybody who sells 101, then the seller can contest you by doing the measurement again and bring to you the result which shows 90. If you measure it many times, then you can produce the result which is different from what was measured once. If you did it many times, then the result would be different. If this was 1,000, then there's no way that you can get away from this result. So I think, yeah, it is in general a good idea not to allow people to sell such contaminated food, and there can be some penalty for doing this, but to actually applying a very strict limit at 101 becquerel, I think it is not doable because of the physics of the radioactive decays.
Do you mind if I add?
Sure.
Thank you for the great question. And my addition to the answer is the penalizing the producer. I'm not sure if penalizing the producer is the right way to do so. And if we have to think about why producers are selling some risky products to the consumers, will be something to do with their compensation. If the compensation to their products is not paid enough, then there might be the incentives for the producer to sell, to take risk. But I don't think the producers will think that will be the wise decision in terms of thinking of future consumers, of the future businesses. So I would ask in different direction to think about how the compensation is being framed vis-a-vis the food standard, rather than how to penalize producers for selling what they're selling.
I have a question for Dr. Hayano. I think that for many people, the problem with feeling that there is any safety in the food in Japan is the general way of handling the situation by the Japanese government. And one question I wanted to ask is, what do you think about the policy of distributing radioactive debris to Tokyo and all over the country to kind of democratize the exposure to everyone, when I think that many radiation experts would say that you should probably put it all together and seal it off. And that's one question, what you think of that system. And the other question I wanted to ask is, I was working with some radioisotopes at Harvard Medical School, actually around 30 years ago. And before we were allowed to use them, we had to go through a very scary half-year course, which told us how very dangerous these very low levels were. And at the same time, we were also hearing from the scientific community that there were new studies being done of the effects of long-term low radiation, that the new thinking was that this is potentially much more dangerous than very, very large exposure for a short time. And I'd like to ask you about both of those things.
Okay, one is the debris. Well, it's the Fukushima debris stay where they are. It is the debris in question is in Miyagi and Iwate, where the radiation level is relatively low, and the contamination, in fact, of the debris of Iwate and Miyagi is in fact of the same order of the debris around, say, Kashiwa or near Tokyo, which was contaminated on March 21st. So if you go to if you actually measure the level of activity, radioactivity of the debris that were brought from the coastline of Miyagi, it is much lower than the debris collected by the Kashiwa city, from somewhat contaminated area around the Kashiwa Tokyo University Kashiwa campus. So in general, I agree what you said. We shouldn't move the contaminated debris, and they should stay where they are. But on the other hand, if you go to those coastlines and then see what it is like, then surely it is important to do something about debris. Otherwise, there is no way of reconstructing the towns or the cities on the coastlines. So I think the argument has to be measured, has to be based on actual measurement. If you measure the radioactivity of the debris of the coastline of Miyagi and Iwate, at most places, it is quite low, much lower than the debris of the metropolitan area. That's one thing. The other thing is long-term exposure to a low level of radiation. That's been a subject of lots of debate over the past year. And I'm not an expert. I'm a physicist, not even a health physicist, so that I am probably not the right person to answer this question. But what at least for this internal exposure that we have been watching in Fukushima, that's very, very low, much below 0.01 millisievert per year. So when we discuss about the low-level radiation, this is below 100 millisievert, down to 0. And we use this LNT model to extrapolate to 0, and then assume that the risk is proportional to the radiation level. But there is no measurement is possible at the level of 0.1 or even below 0.01 millisievert per year. That's almost 0. So quite luckily, the internal radiation or the internal contamination of people, of most of the Fukushima people, except for those few high-risk people who are eating about 10 becquerel per day, this is, at present, there's no such risk. This we know for sure, based on measurement. What I don't know is the risk of external radiation for over many years at the level of a few millisievert. But we know that the people, if you go to India or Brazil, and there are people living in the cities where the natural background is at the level of a few to 10 millisievert per year, so that if you compare the risk of Fukushima people to people living in those natural high background area, I don't think that the risk of radiation level at Fukushima is not that high. But I cannot swear, because this is beyond my capability. But based on the measurement, I think the risk of people living in Fukushima right now is quite low.
I was kind of more interested in terms of like everyday people just eating. We get radiation from the air, from our water, from all.
But we are not eating. That's the point.
Yeah.
We are not eating. That's the point. How many becquerels per day do you think you're eating now in Tokyo?
We don't know.
You don't know.
And we don't have any way of determining the cumulative effect of everything, like radiation on our roofs, radiation at hot spots, this and that. We have no means to.
Okay. Right, so that's exactly what we are trying to assess in Fukushima. I don't know, I don't, my priority is to measure people in Fukushima, not in Tokyo, because the radiation risk is higher. But then, if there in Fukushima, people are eating much less than an average, much less than 1 becquerel per day. That we know for sure. And that's much less than what I ate in 1965, 1964, and we're still alive. 10 million Japanese people ate every day 4 becquerel per day over a year in 1964.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hayano. It was a very clear presentation today, one of the most concise and easiest to understand that I've seen in quite a long time. I appreciate that. And this kind of builds on the previous question in terms of, specialties and the controversies and disagreements about internal risk, about risk from emitters. And you yourself mentioned you're not a health physicist, not a radiobiologist, but you have a lot of colleagues. And as we're all looking for who are the reliable people to read and pay attention to, are there colleagues of yours, health physicists, or radiobiologists, who you particularly have found very reliable and helpful to follow?
Yes, of course I have are in daily contact with medical doctors active in Fukushima, and also, of course, my colleagues at Tokyo University. If you want the specific names, I can give you in private.
Oh,
yeah.
Great. Can I have one more question?
And in the work, actually, I'd like to ask this to bounce to all three, because this is such an important problem, trying to assess the risks, and there's been so much controversy. Have you been familiar with studies such as the CERI report, C-E-R-I-E, from the UK from 2003? They did a 4-year study, very, very detailed, with representing many points of view. And I was wondering if that has been useful or had any influence on your thinking.
I'm embarrassed that I don't know about that data, and then I will look into it, and I'll be interested in, since it's coming from the UK. There's a lot of debate about the accumulation of nuclear disaster, which is not the one of the most well-known disaster in Europe, but there have been the nuclear accident in Sheffield.
Yep. Yes.
Sheffield,
Yep.
and I believe that will be something that I will look into, and something that would be interesting. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I'll say the same. I haven't come across it. I'll have to look into that.
Yes, we have been reading the reports, including that one, and also many Chernobyl report and many other accidents in Brazil. That's the cesium. Somebody took back the cesium to home and then irradiated many people. That type of accident. Yes, we have read many reports. Yes.
Was it useful? Was the CERI
Yes,
report?
yes, of course, yes.
Thank you.
Anthony Slotkovsky from Reuters. I just wanted, Hayano Sensei, I just wanted to ask you about what you said in your final conclusive slide about the internal levels of radiation. You said that they are relatively low. In your presentation, you show slides from the research conducted by Tsubokura Sensei at the Minamisoma General Hospital. And I don't know if the public is aware of the fact that these are pretty much, that the method that he is showing there is his original method that he designed himself with the help of other doctors based in Minamisoma, and it's not a comprehensive public health policy conducted by the government of Japan in the prefecture.
Yeah.
I was therefore wondering, what is the how is this whole thing coordinated across the prefecture? Because obviously Minamisoma is not the most contaminated area in the Fukushima prefecture, and I'm particularly interested in
in the way the data is presented to the public, because this data that you showed there is available on the Minamisama website. If you could elaborate on these issues. That
is a very good point. I'm not so much convinced by the way Fukushima Prefecture disseminate the data that they conducted about the whole body counter measurement. They have so far measured about, if I remember correctly, about 45,000 people since last year. And on the website, they show the number of people in terms of millisievert in unit of 1, 2, 3, which is not a very meaningful number. This is because to convert becquerel, that's the number of cesium nuclei in the body, to sievert, that is the dose, committed dose, effective dose, you have to use some model. Okay, and the assumption up to the end of January, taken by Fukushima Prefecture, was that everybody inhaled cesium on March 12th, or 15th or so, in middle of March. And then they were not eating any extra cesium, so that the cesium was the cesium, the number of cesium nuclei have been decreasing with a half-life of 100 days for adults and 50 days for kids, and so on. And then you measure this person in, for instance, in December, and then based on this assumption, they calculated the internal effective dose. And then the threshold is at 1 millisievert, and if this number came out to be below 1 millisievert, then they say you're safe. Okay. But this does not mean that this person is not internally contaminated. If we look at the numbers in terms of becquerels, it is not zero, or not even below the detection limit. It could have some finite number. And from February 1st, they changed the method of calculating this committed dose, effective dose. They switched from this March inhalation model to constant ingestion model. So the assumption now is that they started to eat the contaminated food from March last year, and they have been this person has been eating the same amount of cesium every day, and then based on that model, they calculate to convert becquerel to cesium. So they changed this model. So what we do together with Sokura-san and others is to release the number of not in terms of sievert, but in terms of becquerel. If you are in doubt, if you have some doubt of the ICRP model, if you want to use the ECRR model, for instance, you can always do this if you know the becquerel number. But once somebody has converted into sievert, then it will be very difficult to go back to other models. So what we are doing is to disseminate numbers in becquerels, and also we, as I showed, we measure the same person twice if this person is contaminated, to determine if this person is eating the contaminated food or not eating contaminated food, and so on. So what I do together with Tsubokura-san and I also work with other hospitals like Hirata and many other places, is quite different from what Fukushima Prefecture does. And I hope in the end that we and the Fukushima Prefecture come to agree to have a common database in the end, so that we can relate the measurements done by Fukushima Prefecture and the measurements done by city hospital and other private hospitals and so on. We are working towards it, but it will take a long time. I have been trying to communicate with Fukushima Prefecture But so far we haven't been successful.
Sorry, can I just ask what's the counter argument, or why is it difficult for you to reach an agreement on that particular issue? Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know, because they don't want to do it our way. that's it. They don't even measure the person's height and weight. So they just measure the total becquerels in the body. That's the only thing they measure. So they cannot publish their numbers in terms of becquerel per kilogram, so that we cannot compare their result with, for instance, the child breathing measurements and the measurements done at other hospitals. So there are many problems, as you may know.
Hi, Dennis Normal. I'm a writer for Science magazine. Has there been any attempt, or was there any attempt to measure exposure to iodine-131? And, okay, I've got another question.
Okay. Well, let me
Yeah,
take one by one. Okay. Yes. So you know about this thyroid screening that was done in March. Many of my colleagues also went to Fukushima and tried to measure as many people as possible by using mostly sodium iodide detector and putting the sodium iodide detector on thyroid and see if they can find somebody with like abnormal high concentration of radioactive iodine 171 in thyroid. That's one. The other thing and that's not our activity. This has been done already. And the highest official number was the effective dose, the highest effective dose, not the committed dose, but this equivalent dose equivalent was 35 millisievert. That's in the official document. What we have been doing is to there are a small number of measurements done in March last year using a highly sensitive whole body counter in Nagasaki University. Nagasaki University has one of the Japanese best whole body counters. And Nagasaki University people sent medical doctors and nurses and so on March 11, March 12 already to Fukushima. And many of them helped people, local people, and came back to Nagasaki. And Nagasaki University measured their internal contamination. And if we look at the spectra, we can see cesium and iodine. Okay, and we know where they were and how many days they spent. And there are some other people, not many people, Fukushima people who fled from Fukushima and eventually went to Nagasaki. And Nagasaki University found those people and measured using their whole body counter the internal contamination of people. So we have some data, not a huge amount of data, but some data. That is, Dr. Matsuda of Nagasaki University has this data, which the spectra showing the cesium and iodine. So based on that kind of data, we are trying to estimate the ratio of iodine and cesium intake. And that depends on where this person was and when this person was in Fukushima. And all other whole body counter measurements were done after, say, June, July last year. Okay, that was after the iodine has already decayed and there was no way of measuring iodine in the body. So what we could only measure was cesium. But we can then extrapolate the cesium level back to March, and then use this ratio that was taken from this Nagasaki measurement to estimate the iodine level in the body. That's what we are trying to do. We haven't reached any conclusion, but there's some way of doing this. People are working on this.
Right. My second question has to do with the epidemiology. You mentioned the debate over the effects of long-term exposure to low doses. Is data coming out of the studies of Fukushima that is going to, will shed light on the effects of long-term exposure to low doses of radiation?
You mean wait for 10, 20 years and then relate? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, actually, when some of these studies were starting, I spoke to some epidemiologists who said that this was an opportunity to start these kinds of studies so that in 20 or 30 years, if you followed people long enough and got the dose information early enough and accurately enough, it could make a tremendous contribution to the understanding of the long-term effects of low doses of radiation. As you know, because of the situation in Chernobyl, a lot of those studies were not started in time, so that kind of data is not coming out of Chernobyl. Some scientists believe that this data could come out of studies of Fukushima.
Yes, we have already a tremendous amount of data from whole body countermeasurement and also a personal dosimeter measurement of many people. And if we just used LNT and then try to estimate the number of cancer patients after 10, 20 years, then I would say that it would be undetectable.
I'm not in charge. Who has their hand up first?
Where's Kyle?
Yes, my name is Tom Benengras. I guess we are getting to an interesting topic here. As you have monitored population very intensely, do you have any idea of what's the dose cumulated over the whole Japanese population, like sieverts integrated over the Japanese population, because that might give an indication of how many cases of cancers there might be if you go by a linear dose-related model?
We don't have that number yet. But we should be able to do this maybe within a year or so. But my gut feeling is that that number would be much lower than what we experienced back in 1964. Everybody eating about 5 peppers per day over several years. That was 100 million people.
Comprising external and internal exposure all in all.
Okay, so we do not yet have a complete sample of the external exposure measurement. So the sampling, the personal dosimeter measurements are done only for a limited number of people. So we do not yet have a complete mapping.
Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. My name is Tatsuki. I'm a medical doctor. So to measure the radiation of agriculture product is maybe not so difficult and very accurate. But how do you measure the level of radiation level of seafood? Because there are because fish don't stay at the same place or take samples or something.
I'm not a scientific expert, but by studying about the fisheries radiation related issues, it is true that it's more difficult to detect the radiation level in the body of a fish and determine where the fish come from, because fish migrates, and that is a problem to assess the safety in terms of where the fish is located and the what fish, because it is a sample, and if you take one of the fish caught off the coast of Fukushima, and that determines as a safe according to the government standard, but it might be different from the fish that's caught off the Ibaraki, even though that it's a similar kind of a population or the same migratory the fish species. So I'm not answering your question correctly in terms of what is safe and what's not safe, but in terms of monitoring the system, it is difficult in terms of the seafood compared to the agriculture products because the fish move.
Can you speak louder?
Yeah.
Okay. No enter zone in the area is designated, but how about no enter zone of, is there a no enter zone of, let's say, the ocean or sea coast area?
Enter zone?
No,
No
So is there a no entrance zone for?
Well, the fishing is
If
prohibited.
there is any protected area, not protected, but there is no exclusion, except for some of the places right off the coast of the nuclear power plant, and the fisheries have been voluntarily cancelled off the coast of Fukushima until just a few days ago. And a few days ago, the Federation of the Fisheries Co-op in Fukushima decided to reopen the fisheries, but they've been able to fish only 3 fish species because all the other 36, if I remember correctly, 36 fish species have been declined to be safe for fishing by the Koseisho, the Ministry of Health and Welfare, because of not just the one sample, but based on the samples coming from the last 3 months, there was at some point that those fish species exceeded the 100 becquerel per kilogram.
My name is Kohei. I thought I'll ask a less technical question. The issue of Anzen and Arjin was quite interesting for me. I think it was also picked up by Beck, like perceived risk and actual risk. Anyway, I think it's beneficial for like public health and also for the farmers in Fukushima if this gap between Anzen and Arjin will be decreased. And I suppose one way is to increase the scientific literacy of the public. But do you think that will diminish the gap between Anshin and Anzen, or is there anything else we can do to kind of match Anzen and Anshin?
That's a great question, thank you. I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking with someone in Fukushima Prefecture who's that's part of the team that's doing a lot of the sample testing for the agricultural products, and we discussed this very same issue. And she said flat out that we don't have an Anzen problem here because we're testing a lot, and we know what the results are saying. What we really have is a problem of trust, a problem of Anshin, as you said. And I don't think they had given a lot of thought on how to address that yet. I would twist it in a different way, which is to think of it from the point of view of the consumer. And as a person who shops, going into a supermarket is an incredibly difficult moment because you enter a shop that has close to 20 to 30,000 items, and on average for a supermarket. Some of the supermarkets have more or less. And you have about 20 to 30 minutes to shop there and plan your meal and get out. So most decisions happen in a snap second. There's not a lot more thought given to that. So what I've come across more, rather than coming across a lot of efforts to increase scientific literacy, I've come across more systems to just simplify that process to the simplified as much as possible. So I've met quite a few people who, for example, will have rules like, I will not buy anything east of Nagoya. And that's just one simple way in which I can go into the grocery shop and just know what I'm going to do. But I agree with you that I think you're right that one of the ways to come around this is to increase the scientific literacy. And one of the ways in which I've been very, one of the changes I've noticed since I started my fieldwork last year and to this point is, for example, when you see the tables of radiation released, depending on how long you leave, as Professor Hayano explained, depending on how long you leave a food sample inside the machine is how accurate of a test you get. So you can get results that are detectable up to 1 becquerel per kilo, but if the same sample, if you test it really quickly in a machine, it would only show this is below 50 becquerels, but below 50 becquerels it just shows as non-detected, but it could be anywhere there. And I've noticed that some of the people around me last year, they were not paying that much attention to this level of not just whether it shows as non-detectable, but does it show non-detectable at what level? And so I certainly have seen around me an increase in scientific literacy by paying attention to this thing, which is actually quite crucial to know exactly where the non-detectable at what level.
I think that's quite okay.
I just have one quick question. From my understanding, the testing is largely done by farmers and by agricultural cooperatives, which leaves a question in many people's minds as to whether you should have these people doing the testing of their own crops in terms of being accurate and honest. Do you advocate more independent testing and bringing in people who have no stake in the outcome of the testing process?
Well, there are two kinds of tests. The testing bodies. One is the local government, and the results I showed in my slide. That's the 53,000 tests done since April 1st. That's were done by local government. That's at the prefecture level, and of course there are many other tests done by NGOs, NPOs, and by farmers, and the local governments, the cities, or the municipalities and so on. They have purchased detectors so that farmers can bring their own, rice and vegetables and then take their measurements. And some of those measurements are published, and some results are hidden, not published. But it is important that farmers know what the level of radioactivity in their own crop. That's very important because not just for selling the product, but for they also consume, they eat the food they produce themselves. And I showed that there are people who are eating, say, at the level of 10 becquerels or 20 becquerels per day, and they are all farmers. They are eating their own produce, and so that what they produce is below the government set limit of 100 becquerel per kilogram, so that it is legal to sell such product. And then they eat their own rice, they eat their own vegetable, and then become internally contaminated. So this is the kind of thing that we're dealing with. And it is very important that those farmers actually measure their own product daily.
Just to add to it a little bit, as far as I know, all the testing is done by either Koseisho, again, the Ministry of Health and Welfare, or the local government at the prefecture level. And then those detective devices are very expensive and then owned by the government-led institutes. So I don't believe I know of many co-ops, either agriculture co-ops or the fishing co-ops, have their own devices and detecting in their own products and trying to sell lower the products that even doesn't meet the government standards. I don't think that would be the case.
There are actually many are
But the
co-ops.
the co-ops, even though they own, that
yeah,
they
they
might be using to even doing something like more stricter the standards, but I don't think they're even have incentives to sell something more higher risk
Yeah.
than the supposed to. I don't think that that's something that the people would think as some business model even. Thank you.
So just to add one more thing to that, a few months ago I met a farmer from Fukushima who sells at farmers markets here in Tokyo, and he was incredibly frustrated on this because he had all his stuff tested. It all showed as non-detectable under 10 becquerels per kilo, and he still lost 80% of his customers. And he couldn't get it. He was like, here are my papers, I'm showing you it's completely safe, and people are still running away. Just to come back to the earlier point is like, yes, there is a space for this technical testing, but there's a real problem of trust and the name of Fukushima itself that plays into it.
My name is Sato, a small business owner, and I'm a businessman. A question to Takahashi sensei. I still believe the Japanese fish is in critical danger because, as other gentleman says, that freshness versus measuring the devices or its scarceness, all these things are leading the conclusion that fish are uncertain about the safety, and particularly so about the data that we can monitor through the internet or government releases. Fish, anything about fish is one of the most difficult data that we can trace. And also the things about the fish is everyday activity to maintain the freshness, so that even I am a regular shopper at the Tsukiji market, and I raise questions about the safety, whatever. The intermediary says that if you have a question, don't ask, but you don't eat. That's the only way that save yourself. We have no guarantee about this because nobody can ever measure this except Hokenjo. And Hokenjo I know as a member of the monitor in the government Food Safety Commission. I know the way Hokenjo does. They tell people 1 week prior to their actual interview, at the time, say 10 a.m., we'll be coming to see you to pick up the sample. And thinking about what will happen. If anything difficulty or whatever they think, either they hide or cheat or just tell the truth. But the danger is fish prices are falling down at the bottom end at the moment, so that those who can eat rounding table of the sushi counter, it is at the highest risk because it is a direct purchase from the port and nobody knows about what it is in. What are you thinking about the way for the average person like myself to prevent the risk about the fish, as I think? Please.
That's very good and difficult question for me to answer. But the one other thing that's personal, the personal level of answering that question, that how to avoid the risks from the eating the fish coming off the northeastern Japan's coast, will be this trace more than just a month's data, so that because it is true that it takes time for the fish sample to be detected with the radiation. Maybe by the time you eat, the radiation level, the data might be different from what you saw a couple of days ago. So my suggestion, if you like to avoid as much as possible, just don't eat the coming from off the coast of anywhere. But at the same time, if you like to increase the level of, not risk, but if you like to eat anything that might be safe, just to avoid the risky ones, I will to suggest that probably just to take a look at the time series of the radiation detection coming from the data of the Kosei or the local government, and that will be my suggestion. But it is true, it is highly uncertain to determine the risk, and that was my paper's point, that nobody can actually grasp what the risk is. And that goes into the discussion of anzen and anshin, the differences, the relation between those two. So yes, it is difficult.
But just to add a little bit to that, fish is probably the most challenging. Some of the groups that I've talked to that are trying to do thorough testing, and the products that it put out often mention that fish is incredibly difficult because of the short shelf life. So, but say it's caught off Kanagawa, but they have their testing facility in Saitama. So but the fish will be leaving at both to their selling point and the testing facility at the same time, and then it has to be scheduled into the machine at some point. So they have to be, and then the fish has to be prepared. You can't just throw the whole fish in the machine. It has to be pureed. So it's a logistical nightmare to get fish tested sometimes for these co-ops. The one thing I've often heard, I can't speak to the scientific merits of this, but I've come across this advice many times, is if your concern is to avoid the guts and the bones and to eat more of the flesh. The idea being that you might find higher concentrations in the guts.
And I also heard that that's based on the different kind of the radioactive isotopes. So the bones are usually contaminated with what's the strontium, but the cesium tend to be in the muscles, so that will be the whole body. So it's a different kind of a risk associated with a different kind of a radioactive isotope. So it is highly ambiguous and hard to define. But in terms of the testing, if you like to hire your certainty, it's not the 100% certainty, but increase your certainty about your understanding of the test, I would think that it's more accurate for you to take a look at the prefectural level of radiation testing rather than the national level, because you can identify which fish are coming from, and then usually the fish labels are reliable, other than you have to think about the migration of the species, but not all the fishes are cross-prefecture migratory. So depending on the fish species, you can have higher certainty about the food safety in terms of the testing as well as the fish that you're consuming.
Okay, thank you. This will be the last question.
Hello. I just wanted to know, you said before that if you test something once and then you test it again, the measure could be slightly over 100 becquerels or under. How many times do you have to test something to get a true measure? Like, to be sure that it is, you know, like, do you test it 5 times and 4 times out of 5 it's under? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what people usually do is to use a different detector if you are in doubt. So normally the low-cost measurements, I mean the measurements done by most people.
Integration of detector.
I mean, like.
No. Let me. Okay, so they use a sodium so-called sodium iodide detector, which has a certain sensitivity, and if you use the same detector over and over again, then typically it fluctuates within some 10%. Okay, so if you measure it and if you're not certain if this is above 100 or below 100, then they bring the same sample to other detector, which is a germanium detector, which has a higher sensitivity. which has a lower detection limit of say 1 becquerel or so, then the fluctuation would be much smaller, so that in just one measurement, you can tell whether this is above or below 100.
So why don't they just use a better detector?
Because it is the number of that detector is quite limited. It is very, very expensive detector, so that you cannot measure everything with that kind of detector. And farmers don't have them, of course.
Oh, you'd expect the government, the local governments to have
Yeah,
those.
the government, local government have them, but not enough to measure everything with that detector, and to reach that level of, say, a precision of, say, 1% instead of 10%. Then the measurement time, it takes longer time to measure. So if you start to measure everything with that expensive detector, then you are sampling only a small fraction of food, and that is bad. It is better if you, even with a high threshold, it is better to measure many more samples than reject the high risk food, rather than measuring one sample with 1% precision. So that's what they are doing. So they first measure with this low cost sodium iodide detector, which typically has a 10% precision. Then, if in doubt, then they measure this with a highly sensitive detector. That's what they do.
So food is only tested once? Samples of one is tested?
Yeah, so what they do is to measure just once using sodium iodide, and then if it is suspected that this is above 100, then they usually bring this to sodium germanium detector and have it measured with a high precision to make sure that to make sure that it is above or below 100. This is what they do.
Measure 150.
Yeah.
Just to add a little bit to that, so just to, for an example, one of the agricultural research stations I visited recently in Fukushima, they do exactly this. They have a sodium detector, and if anything they're tested above 50, then they will send to Koriyama for testing with a much more expensive germanium detector. And much more precise. What other places that I've met do is that during the day, when there's staff at the office, they will use the machine. They will use the machine basically non-stop at, say, 30-minute intervals to get above a detection level of, say, 10 becquerels or 20 becquerels per kilo, depending on the machine. But then for items that they consider highly sensitive, of which you consume a lot, for example, rice or milk, they'll leave them overnight. So at the end of the day, they'll load the machine and leave them for 10 hours, and then they'll be able to, because it's there for a longer time, they'll get a much more accurate reading than otherwise possible.
Thank you so much.
And of course, it is impossible to leave a person in a whole body counter for night. A typical measurement time is just 2 minutes. Yeah.
I wish we had a couple more hours to talk through this, but you can look at Hayano Sensei's Twitter feed, which is continuous, and eventually the books that will be produced by Satsuki and Nico. So thank you to our guests for